Sudanese novel History and Development, Leila, Aboulela, 1964, Part 2. The audience, it is my great pleasure to welcome you once again to our second encounter with the international acclaimed Sudanese novelist Leila Aboulela as part of our documentary series, tracing the history, development, and intellectual transformations of the Sudanese novel. In our first episode, we paused at key moments from her biography and reflected on her creative journey between homeland and diaspora, and on how diverse cultural environments have shaped her narrative consciousness. Today, however, we dedicate this session to exploring her fictional world from a deeper perspective, focusing on the influence of Islam and Sufism in her works, not merely as a cultural backdrop, but as the dynamic forces that shape vision, character development, and dramatic conflict. Together, we will examine her personal perspective on placing Islam and Sufism at the heart of several of her short stories and novels, and how this focus is reflected in her treatment of identity, exile, the encounter with the other, and the meaning of faith in a rapidly changing contemporary world. We will also consider the spiritual dimension in her writing and how it intersects with questions of modernity, belonging, and cultural openness. Welcome once again, the audience. We hope this encounter will offer a thoughtful space for reflection and dialogue. So stay with us. So the audience, this is our second encounter with the renowned Sudanese novelist Leila Aboulela. In our first encounter, as you follow, we have presented her biography. And now, I would like to take her impact with Islam and Sufism in her writing. So what I would like to stress on is that I would like, as I told, to see the views that has been expressed by her towards her following the impact or tracing the impact of religion, tracing the impact of Islam and Tasawwuf in her writing from a side, and some other views that have been expressed and has been taken by researchers who have investigated her literary works. More details about the influence, the impact of religion, of Islam and Tasawwuf in her writing will be taken separately in separate episodes. I mean by this, just in our encounter with her today, general overview, general impression about her relation to Islam and Sufism in her writing from one side, and the views of some other researchers from another site tackling the same area, that is the influence of Islam and Sufism in her writing. While, as I told, a separate episode will be devoted to take parts of her literary works in which we try to trace together the impact of Islam, the impact of religion, and the impact of Sufism in her writing. The Marcus review, she has been asked, you publicly identify the devout Muslim, and all of your novels feature devout Muslims who are guided by their faith in making difficult decisions. How do you write about faith today? People tend to cringe when they hear of a Christian or Muslim writer who identifies as such. While you may be free to write, people are free to disregard you, not publish you, marginalize you, and patronize you. Who before you wrote in a way that gave you permission to write as you do on the topics that you do? Completely, unapologetically, and unsentimentally. So her answer for these questions has come as follows. I came to writing after I had failed at getting a PhD in statistics. During the academic appraisal in which this decision was made, I was told by the examining professor that I should have read the book entitled How to Get a PhD. This was ironic because I had in fact read the book. What I learned from it was that you should review the literature in your chosen topic and then bring in or add something new. Although I had obviously failed to do that in statistics, I carried the idea with me when I started writing fiction. To write fiction. I resolved to add Islam to literature written in English, to push the boundaries because the faith was not there, at least not explicitly. In this way, I would be bringing something new to English literature. So I set out to write in the tradition of post-colonial African literature with a focus on the Muslim experience. I was inspired by writers who had been born in various parts of the world and who had come to Britain, such as Taib Saleh, Ben O'Carey, Ahdaf Swaif, Doris Lessings, Butchi Emetishita, Jan Reis, Anetia Desai, and Abdul Razik Ranh. Writing as a person of faith is a challenge. I remember Taib Saleh telling me after he had read the translator that members of his generation were shy to include such matters in their work. It can be cringy to talk about faith and a challenge to reach readers who are very likely to be skeptical of anything spiritual. I believe that words that express faith have to emerge naturally from the character and not just be shoehorned in. I also take care to show characters with different relationships to faith or none at all. And I always take religion seriously. I'm never dismissive. I write about flawed characters, not ideal ones. I'm also very careful not to preach. Unapologetically and unsentimentally reflects my own personal stance. I also have to say that I have had full support from publishers. So, the audience, as you follow, I have shared part of an interview in which had been asked. The interview had been, in fact, carried out and conducted with Leila Aboulela. And one of the questions that have been pointed to her, it was about Islam in her writings, and we listened to her answer in that way. So here I would like to share in another interview has relation to Islamic mysticism, and what I would like to share, as I told, is just another interviews that have been conducted with her. So Leila Aboulela openly spoke about her belief in a faith based upon both mystical and legal precepts. When asked whether she views Islamic mysticism as a separate entity from a more orthodox interpretation of the Quran, she replied, "No, I see them both together as being one. Laws without any feelings are lifeless. You are just doing them because you have to do them. The result might look good on the outside, but inside the heart is dead. Then there are people who do everything out of love for God, yet who have rejected the Sharia. As Muslims, we have to put the two sides together." So the audience, this is our second encounter with the renowned Sudanese novelist Leila Aboulela. In our first encounter, as you follow, we have presented her biography. And now, just I would like to take her impact with Islam and Sufism in her writing. So what I would like to stress on is that just I would like, as I told, to see the views that has been expressed by her towards her following the impact or tracing the impact of religion, tracing the impact of Islam on Tasawwuf in her writing from a side, and some other views that have been expressed and has been taken by researchers who have investigated her literary works. More details about the influence, the impact of religion, of Islam and Tasawwuf in her writing will be taken separately in separate episodes. I mean by this, just in our encounter with her today, general overview, general impression about her relation to Islam and Sufism in her writing from one side, and the views of some other researchers from another side, tackling the same area, that is the influence of Islam and Sufism in her writing. While, as I told, a separate episode will be devoted to take parts of her literary works in which we try to trace together the impact of Islam, the impact of religion, and the impact of Sufism in her writing. Detailed reading of Aboulaila's fiction reveals the extent to which the outer and inner aspects of Sufi religious practice are visible in her texts. So, outer and inner are two concepts in Sufism. Outer referring to the outer Sharia or the outward part of the religion, and that is Islam, Sharia, while inner referring to the inward, and that is Haqiqa. On an overt level, there are numerous explicit references to Sufism in her narratives, and the latter reveal both strong knowledge of and interest in several prominent Sufi orders and esteemed historical figures who have been active within the Sufi tradition. For example, in the kindness of enemies is one of her outstanding and famous, well-known masterpiece novel. So in this novel, The Kindness of Enemies contains an epigraph accredited to an anonymous Sufi saint of the 20th century, and the novel itself contains a fictionalized account of the life of Imam Shamil, an important Muslim political and religious leader from the Caucasus, who was a prominent sheikh in the Sufi Naqshbandi order. Another influential sheikh from the same order, that is the Naqshbandi Sufi order, is Maulana Abdullah al-Dagestani, originally from Turkey, is mentioned in the same novel. And in Lyrics Alley, which is another famous and well-known novel to the credit of our novelist Leila Aboulela, the central protagonist called Badr is said at one point to be reading Imam al-Ghazali classic Sufi texts, The Revival of Sciences of Religion. More influence on her writing is The Translator, his ever first written novel. So in this novel, The Translator contains an extract from the controversial writer Ibn Nawas, a historical figure commonly believed to have lived the final years of his life as a Sufi and whose poetry is deeply impregnated with Sufi mysticism. In the short story, Days rotate from her Color Lights collection. The two main protagonists are said to listen to a diwan of Sheikh al-Alawi, who was a Sufi sheikh active within the classic Dargawi Shadhili tradition. Moreover, a number of Aboulaila's characters reveal a detailed knowledge of Sufism, and at certain points come into contact with the more visible aspects of its teachings. In The Kindness of Enemies, Natasha attends a dhikr, which is said to be performed by the same Sufi tariqat that Imam Shamil belonged to. In Sufi devotion, zikr, meaning remembrance of Allah, embodies both a solemn ritual and a spiritual state of mind. In Mirad, another famous literary text, Najwa participates in a tafsir class, which implies that she is being exposed to a form of Sufi exegesis, usually relating to the inner meaning of a specific passage in the Quran. In the same novel, Najwa asks Tamer's mother whether she has listened to the program on the radio about Sufism. In The Translator, Ray's uncle, who has gone to Egypt in a military capacity, is said to have become interested in Sufism and converted to Islam. and in the kindness of enemies, Malak's teenage son Ud addresses her as a Sufi, to which she responds, "Am I a Sufi? Do you see me as such? Then you are doing me a great honor." These numerous references to Sufism classical Sufi texts and important historical figures within the movement itself can be said to represent the outer or more visible manifestations of Abouleila's knowledge of Sufism. A closer and more attentive reading, however, reveals the extent to which she has accepted the validity of its inner dimension. Indeed, her character's desire to impulse what can be termed the living heart of Islam lead them to undergo spiritual transformation that bears strikingly similarity to the experiences undergone by the so-called Sufi traveler on the road to self-realization. This is partly manifested in the manner by which several of her central protagonists become involved in what can only be described as spiritual journey. As Mark Sedgwick has noted, many Sufis themselves, when asked to define what actually constitutes a Sufi, will invariably use a phrase such as a traveler on the path back to his maker. And Al-Ghazali has referred to the adept who travels on his way towards God. As the most important goal of Sufism is to return man to his original state of purity, where he was not yet separated from the spiritual world. This implies that the seeker is obligated to follow what can carefully be described as an inward path. Ansari Harawi has written in his classic texts the stages of travelers toward God. To the Sufi progress on his journey, he is believed to ascend a double ladder of initiatory stations and spiritual states. I would like to reminding you that I'm presenting Leila. For instance, the narrative implies that a Frey, Scottish academic fascinated by the Middle Eastern politics, is to truly understand Islam, he must relinquish a fascination with its cultural manifestation and actively impart the inner dimensions of the faith. As Summer comments, he would not understand Islam until he lived it, and she is insistent that he look beyond the causes to the first. The real religion and tasawwuf has been debated and had been required and asked. So, for example, in the Minaret, Najwa confesses how she yearned to go back to being safe with God. And in this regard, in Abouleila's fiction, the concept of home, that homecoming, is not exclusively related to the experience of diaspora in a literal physical sense or the tribulations attendant upon voluntary or enforced exile. Rather, her use of the term transcends the idea of physical space and implies a spiritual homecoming, where after overcoming numerous obstacles, the seeker achieves spiritual union with God. To arrive home involves embracing the inner dimensions of the revelation given to our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, and developing the ability to, as Natasha in the kindness of enemies expresses it, delve into the hidden truths behind the disguise. Another dimension that pointing out to the influence and the impact of the Sufi culture in Leila Abouleila's writing is her tackling the area of the teacher-disciple relationship, and this is one of a Sufi influence, as I told in her writing. And by the way, teacher or disciple, murid, spiritual guide, relationship is essential part in Sufism. So Abouleila's interest in the teacher-disciple dynamic is taken a step further in the kindness of enemies through the parallel narratives of Shamil and Natasha, whose interrelated stories are separated by a time span of over 200 years. The former's spiritual teacher is called Sheikh Jamaluddin al-Husseini, the gentle Sufi scholar, and we are informed that Shamil had soaked up the Sheikh's influence Sufi teachings, eager for enlightenment, eager for the grace and strength that came from the Creator. Together with his friend Qazi Muhammad al-Qimrawi, they had known that perfection could not be reached without the instructions of a master. They were seekers, and Sheikh Jamaluddin their spiritual guide. On the other hand, for the writer and the novelist, Leila Aboulela has her own views towards the sort of Islam that have been dominated the scene in Sudan before the coming of the Orthodox Islam or the ideological Islam. So just I would like to share her views in this concern. So Abouleila's engagement with the ideological deterioration of Islamic school in the post-colonial world stemmed from the struggle within post-colonial Sudan. For Aboulela, Sufism represents the original form of Islam practiced by the Sudanese prior to the Islamicization of the state. In a personal interview, Aboulela spoke about her relationship with Sufism, explaining that Sufism was introduced peacefully to Sudan from North Africa. In her view, the rise of political Islam in 1989, which was achieved through a coup supported by the Muslim Brotherhood, led to a decline in the popularity of Sufism in contemporary Sudan. This view is historically valid in Islamicism in the Sudan. Who was the challenger? What was at stake? Stefano Lucy explained that the 1989 coup led by General Omar al-Hassan al-Bashir was associated with the National Islamic Front, NIF, which is the Muslim Brotherhood's political party. This party associated nationalism with religion, calling for a unified Islamic nation. From another hand, Abouleila's nostalgic account does not mean that she supports the Sufism completely. She criticized this traditional and unformed Sufism as involving superstitions. However, the struggle between the two streams continues to inspire her narrative, compelling her to raise questions regarding the contemporary attributes of past ideological and political violence. By this, the audience, I came to the end of our second encounter with Leila Aboulela, in which we have shared some views, some ideas that have been targeted, her influence, her impact with Islamic religion and Sufism based on some researchers' views, as well as I told, with interviews that have been conducted by the novelist herself. And once again, I would like to emphasize that a thorough individual episode will be targeting that area, that the influence, the impact of Islam, of Tasawwuf in her writing. It will be taken in separate episodes in our coming future days. And before to wrap up here, just I would like to point out to the sources that I have consulted to introduce this episode. Munal Amin, Spirituality and Islamic Feminism, a critical analysis of religious agency in selected literary and cinematic works, a thesis, PhD thesis submitted in fulfillment of the requirement for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Post-Colonial Studies, School of English, University of Kent, April 2018. Another source, published paper, From the Secular to the Sacred, the Influence of Sufism on the work of Leila Aboulela. And then here we have The Impact of Sufism on Arts, published book by Jalil Abdullah Saleh, Cairo 2024, by Musawarat for publication and distribution. So till seeing you in another episode, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.